Chapter 2 of the Overlord of Nadeshiko. A few minutes later, and Suzuki Satoru still wasn't any closer to solving the mystery behind his arrival, although he was unnaturally calm after the claim that he was now betrothed to a woman known as Shizuka. This strange calmness allowed Ains to ask various questions. None of the answers he received helped in any significant way. Perhaps he was being cautious, inquiring only about specific topics that matched with what he observed, rather than anything particularly related to Yggdrasil. There was quite a bit of information, mostly as to Nadeshiko village. He had introduced himself as Ains Ulgaun earlier on a whim. And the more he thought about it, the more he internally patted himself on the back. There were divinations back in Yggdrasil that required a player avatar's name to be used, so hiding his identity as Mamanga had a benefit. Honestly, he wasn't ready to get married yet. He was still young. What would his co-workers think? What would his friends think? He could already picture many of his guild members congratulating him on his marriage. Hello? He could use some advice here. Hiro. Touch me. Tabula. Anyone. No, that doesn't include you, Perorancino. His emotions peaked and were immediately brought back down to a manageable level. No, now that he thought more clearly about it. There was an advantage to this. As the husband of a village leader, he would gain a high-rank position. While not to the position of a CEO, that would be Shizuka, or the investors, who would be the elders. So would that make him the COO, Chief Operating Officer? What a high position! He couldn't imagine being that far up. Still, it presented him a suitable position of power over a ninja village, which sounded quite militant in its workings. Shizuka had been very forthcoming with questions and answers related to Nadeshiko village as they walked closer and closer to the three hilltops of the valley, which he now identified as the aforementioned village. Satoru put together bits and pieces from her explanations that form a cohesive narrative on how things worked around here. But there was still so much information lacking, which unsettled him to be left in the dark. Nadeshiko village was an all-kunoichi settlement, which meant its military was primarily female combatants, not dissimilar to Amazonians, but men did live in Nadeshiko and served non-combatant roles. As a ninja village, its primary source of income was mercenary contracts, which was quite common in this world, so competition was fierce between villages. Nadeshiko happened to be in a fortunate position. Its geographical location made it easier to defend against enemy attacks, and the village had been fortified to a significant degree. All this information was relatively normal, but it was the next bit that confused him. Only girls were born from this village's populace. Now, races specific to only a particular gender or even genderless were not new. The Guild of Ains Ulgaun had numerous members of genderless races. And plenty of mercenary NPCs within the Great Tomb of Nazarick were without gender. But Nadeshiko village was wholly a human settlement. It shouldn't have such a specific problem that only girls were birthed. There was something else. Ains Ulgaun followed Shizuka as they began walking down a dirt road created by traders and travelers walking to and from Nadeshiko.
Do you have a genetic trait that causes only girls to be born?
He asked.
It's been speculated, but there hasn't been anything to confirm it. The elders explained it as a defunct bloodline limit, but records indicate that it may concern the actual region itself.
Shizuka explained, her gaze observing Ains throughout their small trek. He couldn't identify whether she willingly wanted to marry him or not, such was the emotional mask she kept. A bloodline limit? Was that some sort of racial skill? Humanoid races in Yggdrasil didn't have racial levels, but it may be different here. In any case, the problem sounded like a region-specific effect.
Why not consider relocating?
Ains questioned.
This is their home. Nobody wishes to leave, Shizuka answered. If you had a home, wouldn't you wish to stay?
Yes, he would have preferred to stay in Nazarick. The human behind Ains, Suzuki Satoru, would isolate himself within the tomb if had the choice of returning. That Ains didn't know whether or not the Great Tomb of Nazarick was even present in this world, or even if there were other players besides himself. He was aware that he wasn't the only individual online at the end of Yggdrasil, so the possibility was there. He looked up to the sky.
I see.
Did the possibility also include the chance that his friends were also transported to this world? It was a tiny hope, but one that Ains kept in the back of his mind.
This is Nadeshiko's entry point,
Shizuka said, pointing towards her village. Ains examined the fortified entrance which lead upward into Nadeshiko village's lowest hilltop. The main eye-catcher was a structure with two separate stone staircases on either side of a wooden and brick open-air tower that had a system of pulleys and gears made out of various materials, notably what looked like steel, which created a sizable cargo lift. It was an elaborate system and looked excruciatingly slow compared to the technological standards Satoru was used to. The majority of the travelers went up and down the staircases, each being wide enough for multiple people, while the cargo lift was reserved for goods, carts, and other large objects. Frankly, it was all very subpar. Ains could think of several ways it could be easily improved, but he lacked the expertise and knowledge on how many of them would be done. He knew about better elevators, but that didn't mean he could construct them.
And perhaps that could work.
Ains wondered about the usage of magic. The spells in his mind didn't seem entirely restricted to the same purpose as in Yggdrasil, as if a facet of reality now influenced them. Shizuka looked curious.
Lord Ains Ulgaun? What could work?
Sorry, I was in thought.
He apologized, lowering his hand from his chin.
Is there a specific ceremony we have to do to complete the marriage?
Right.
She frowned, an expression he took note of, displeased with something.
I take it you disapprove of my status as a husband?
Ains asked, silently hoping that he might get out of this betrothed status. But she returned to a more blank expression.
As per my village's laws, you are my betrothed, whether or not I approve of it.
You mentioned these elders in our brief exchange,
he said, referring back to the questions and answers.
I take it they hold significant power if they can upheave your decision to change laws.
A group of investors was always a terrifying collection of individuals, able to influence the upper management of a company and cause workers like Suzuki Satoru to work overtime to satisfy their desires.
I'm still too inexperienced in their eyes, and previous actions to challenge the laws have led to conflict between us,
Shizuka answered. A conflict between the interest of the CEO and the interests of the investors, a story told many times back on Earth, with the investors winning more times than not.
If you hate me, I will not fault you,
he said. She stopped and faced him. He stopped his walk as well.
I do not hate you, Ains Ulgaun, but I do not love you.
I understand. I feel the same.
Ains replied in mutual agreement.
In accordance to your laws and culture, I will marry you and fulfill the duties expected of the village leader's husband. Speaking of which, what does that entail?
Shizuka paused for a moment, her face growing crimson for a moment before she shook her head and returned to a normal color. The kunoichi looked firmly and began.
In the future, we do need to conceive a child, but that's not until years later. The right of succession in Nadeshiko is not from mother to daughter, but rather from master to student.
So, succession is dependent on the designated apprentice of the previous leader,
Ains said, approving the method better than a family designation, which could lead to problems. In the meantime, this meant that there wasn't any sort of pressure for him to help conceive an heir. This is impossible, as he completely lost his buddy upon transferring to his game avatar.
The husband of the current village leader has a responsibility of protecting the village and aiding in militant matters, trade, and foreign relations. However, I hold the final say.
The kunoichi replied to his earlier question.
Our village doesn't do traditional weddings.
I understand,
he said.
Shall we enter Nadeshiko village, then?
In Shizuka's time, She had met many potential suitors, but none of them were like the man next to her, Ains Ulgaun. He was powerful. Maybe not as powerful as her teacher had been before her death, but strong nonetheless, from what Shizuka had witnessed and experienced. But it wasn't strength that made him different, but rather his demeanor. He was calm and calculating, not letting emotions control him. Logic seemed to drive the man. It wasn't the cold exterior displayed in some ninja, or the fiery youth in the newer generations. He accepted the circumstance of her village laws and culture as if he expected it would happen. Did he plan this? Was he keenly aware of Shizuka and Nadeshiko? Did perhaps he acted unaware to fool her and gather information? Even if he did, Shizuka would be helpless against him. The law was clear. She'd been defeated and must marry him. It seemed content with the level of control his position would grant him in Nadeshiko village. But was that because he had what he needed? Or was a darker, more subtle plan was in the works? She didn't know. Shizuka didn't know Ains Ulgaun. That was the problem. It was always the problem with this particular rule. What husband had the well-being of their wife and the village if they only needed to defeat a kunoichi from there to marry in? Sure, a majority of men that joined Nadeshiko village wouldn't have major positions, and wouldn't fare well against an entire ninja village's forces. But Ains did not have that problem. He was strong enough to utterly defeat Shizuka. If he decided to, he could deal extreme damage to Nadeshiko before they could defeat him. And that's only if he was as powerful as he'd shown so far. Thankfully, that didn't seem the case so far. Upon approaching the entrance into Nadeshiko village, there was a small checkpoint between them and the staircases and lift. There are 2 kunoichi stationed here at all times, and while they smiled warmly and waved at Shizuka, their eyes glanced over to Ains and their bodies tensed, reaching warily for their weapon pouches. An understandable reaction. Ains Ulgaun was a towering figure, and unmistakably male given the broad physique. Shizuka raised her hand to halt their actions. "Do not be concerned. He is my betrothed." They looked at her with stunned expressions, not unexpected, considering her history in denouncing the village's laws before the incident. It had not been that long ago, and the story was still fresh for a relatively small ninja village like Nadeshiko. After a moment to recover, one of them entered a nearby outpost and carried back a clipboard with paperwork. The kunoichi walked up to them, gaze looking up to the mask adorned on Ains Ulgaun's face.
"Welcome to Nadeshiko village."
Her words trailed off for a moment, taking notice of how tall the man was when up close.
"I need you to fill in some paperwork before we allow you entry. We'll speed through the process, as you are joining according to our cultural law."
Ains Ulgaun took the clipboard and writing utensil attached to it.
Japanese. Fortunate.
D was necessary. All travelers and traders were required to fill in a permissive form. Nadeshiko village's residents were quite isolationist compared to other ninja villages, but not opposed to foreigners entering to do business. Such is the nature of mercenary work. It was the permanency of their stay that made the village hesitant, and only allowed permanent residency towards men betrothed to kunoichi. Not so much out of fear or hate of men, rather than the unbalanced ratio of the gender, and the strange oddity of only girl births caused wariness. Shizuka heard the ninja clans acted the same way to those not of their clan. In this way, Nadeshiko village acted like a clan. "Can I see that when you're finished?" Shizuka asked, curious as to what the man would write down. The form he held was not the one used for travelers or traders. Rather, it was more akin to an immigration paper.
"Sure,"
he replied and handed it over already finished without an issue. She blinked, tentatively grabbing the clipboard and eyes skimming over the written contents. Name? Ains Ulgaun. Previous occupation? Guild master. Previous village? None. Previous ninja rank? None. 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 What was with this lack of information? Are you joking? Shizuka said, looking up at him. There's no way this is correct. Firstly, a guild master? As in leader of a trade guild? And what do you mean you don't have any ninja relations?
All I have written there is the truth. I do not have any connections with prior ninja villages, and my strength is the result of self-study.
He answered so factly that Shizuka almost felt compelled to believe him, if not for the huge contrast between what she saw and what he wrote well. Not contrast per se. The written words didn't deny anything Shizuka knew about, just left blank the possible explanations as to how he managed to get this level. Can I ask you to take off the mask? Shizuka asked.
I'll rather not. It's extremely personal.
He denied.
Lady Shizuka?
The entrance Kunoichi inquired. Let him in. She handed it over, noting to herself to try and find more about the background of Ain's Uul gown. The Kunoichi glanced over the form itself, taking a glance at Ain's, but didn't say anything against Shizuka's word.
All seems to be in order. A pleasure having you in Nadeshiko, Lord Ain's Uul gown.
Thank you for the pleasantries. I intend to aid Shizuka dutifully with Nadeshiko.
Ain's replied in earnest. Shizuka walked forward with Ain's by her side and began the trek up the staircase leading to Nadeshiko village's forward segment, which was also the residential area for much of the newer populace. Those that had been introduced to the village only a generation or two ago made their homes here. So out of the 3 hills, this had the largest concentration of male individuals, as well as the majority of trade occurring here. If Shizuka had not been the village leader, Ain's would have also lived in this segment. But in thank to her position, it would be the second segment, the tallest and also most fortified hilltop of the 3. The stature of Ain's Uul gown caught a few curious glances from traders and travelers, walking down and up the stairs. He was, after all, larger than any man in sight, and his clothing was of remarkable needlework and embroidery, and strong enough to deflect thrown kunai, Shizuka recalled. At approaching the top of the staircase, the large, busy town greeted Shizuka's sight. She was familiar with all the buildings and many of its residents, as required of her. The population of Nadeshiko village was about 3,000 individuals, due in part to its isolationist nature and cultural laws concerning marriage, and about 1/6 of that number were kunoichi, which made the village quite militant compared to its civilian population. This was purposeful. There is no division of civilian and ninja academy. They are one and the same, though maternal consent is taking into account whether a young girl will learn chakra-related knowledge for military purposes. All girls of Nadeshiko know how to use chakra, but not all girls are trained to become kunoichi. So even if they knew how to use chakra, that didn't mean they knew combat ninjutsu. Most Nadeshiko civilians only use chakra for trade-related items, requiring its use. Ain seemed to take in the sight, but it was hard to tell what his opinion was underneath the mask. She couldn't force him to remove it, but as long as he wasn't some wanted ninja, there wouldn't be a problem. All she'll need is one glance at the face underneath to determine that Shizuka recognized faces from the bingo book. We'll be heading to the primary segment of Nadeshiko, which is the next hill over, connected by a bridge, Shizuka said, not mentioning the other flight of stairs that lead up to the tallest area, ideally wondering if he'd considered flying rather than taking the stairs, or walking up the side. Well, he'd need to go through it officially, so Shizuka would rather Ain's not take the shortcuts.
Nishikienrai, is he seeing this from somewhere? It's an entire village run by kunoichi, quite an interesting sight. One could spot their uniforms in particular hidden spots if one paid attention. Takamikazuchi, were there samurai in this world as well? Surely he would enjoy watching real ones perform swordsmanship. Punitomo, what would be his opinion of this village's defenses and location? Hiro, if only that black-hearted company didn't drain him so much. Maybe he could be seeing this world with him. The mind of Ain's Ulgaun reminisces of friends somewhere far away. Each thought wondering about their reactions as he followed the village leader through the first segment of Nadeshiko. But it didn't take too long for Ains to focus back on the matter at hand. They had already begun crossing the bridge leading to the second hilltop. This was the center area of Nadeshiko village, where the higher-ups had residency and company decisions there. Village decisions were stamped into approval.
Lady Shizuka.
A voice called out to the young kunoichi. Ains watched as an older-looking woman in uniform and a long katana strapped to her back jumped down from the walls, ran down them, then jumped onto the bridge. With a closer look, she was tall when paired with other kunoichi he'd seen so far, but not matching his height. She had quite the angular face, with a sleek spiky hair that went back.
Tokiwa.
Shizuka spoke the name of the newcomer.
She's my attendant,
she explained to him.
Who is this man beside you?
She questioned, looking warily at him.
This is Ain's Ulgaun, my betrothed,
she said, then quickly added.
He defeated me. Did he?
Tokiwa stared at him. He felt a little unnerved at her accusatory stare. It wasn't his fault that their culture and laws were so strange. Don't push the blame on him. He's basically the victim in this scenario. Well, not exactly a victim, since he agreed to it. Ains wondered how the elders would be, probably many times worse, could only imagine how the CEO faced investors. Ugh, he really didn't want to deal with that. He felt something suppress the anxiety he felt. No, it was necessary. There had to be introductions and a process to confirm his new position within Nadeshiko, especially for such a quick promotion from a new employee to a chief officer. Though, that did bring the question, how did this village manage to immigrate men so many times and not have problems without resorting to military force? If military force would even work, considering the law was that the man had to beat the woman in combat, so wouldn't the husbands be stronger in this village than their wives due to that rule? He could feel a growing mental strain, and something told him that this wasn't the first time this would occur.
I did defeat Shizuka in a battle,
he admitted.
She informed me of your law, and I have agreed to it. But I imagine such approval would not be easily obtained from others of the village, taking her leadership position into account.
I believe her. She's never lied to me. But it's the elders that need convincing,
Tokiwa said, her attention switching to the kunoichi leader.
They might think you are trying to marry a weaker man again. If they want to arrange another accident, then they will be surprised at the outcome.
Shizuka responded with a serious tone. Ains was aware of what Shizuka meant, having pieced together her backstory of this accident from what was said before to him.
So, I should expect potential enemies.
Shizuka nodded.
Likely tonight or the upcoming days. I'll have to introduce you to them now. But those kunoishis should be weaker than me, so I am sure you'll defeat them.
I assume that killing them will be ill-advised?
Ains asked.
Please refrain from it,
Shizuka answered.
They're part of Nadeshiko's kunoichi forces, and we need every kunoichi we can spare for our defenses and contract missions. Just defeat them without too many injuries,
Tokiwa advised.
We have medic ninjas, but they are very few.
Oh, medic ninja? A healer job class that didn't exist in Yggdrasil? So the ninja class here had its own subcategory similar to assassin had its many, but perhaps allowing for a more diverse range of what could be their variant of magic casters.
Interesting,
Ains said to himself.
I'll restrain myself, but I do wish to see medic ninja work. Call it a curiosity.
Now that he thought about it, the male ninja from earlier also used an earth element-based attack, another jutsu not existing in Yggdrasil to Ain's knowledge. So, that begged the question, how many elements could jutsu here use? He was already aware of wind and earth elements. What about dark or holy? Sun? Moon? Likely yin and yang elements. He actually looked forward to fighting these would-be assassin kunoichis. After meeting the elders, which he did not look forward to,